They set him up as a joke. They put her at that table thinking she would crush him, or he would embarrass himself trying. Either way, someone was supposed to leave that restaurant humiliated. What his friends never counted on was Ethan Brooks refusing to play along. What her colleagues never anticipated was Olivia Bennett choosing to stay. One dinner, two people who were never supposed to connect, and a group of so-called friends who would spend the next 2 years watching everything they thought they understood about love turn out to be completely wrong. If this story finds you tonight, drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The restaurant was called Marble and Vine, and it was the kind of place that made Ethan Brooks feel like he'd walked into someone else's life. He stood on the sidewalk for a full 30 seconds before pushing through the front door, long enough for a couple in expensive coats to glide past him without a glance, long enough to read the menu displayed in the window and do the math in his head. The cheapest entree was $42. He had $48 in his wallet, which meant he was already calculating whether he could quietly cover his portion of a shared bill or whether tonight was going to be one of those situations where he had to let someone else's credit card do the work and spend the next 2 weeks feeling weird about it. He pushed through the door anyway. The hostess smiled at him with professional warmth. "Reservation under?" "Marcus Webb," Ethan said. She checked her screen, nodded, and led him through the dining room. The place was all low lighting and dark wood, and the kind of acoustic design that kept conversations private. Cloth napkins folded into architectural shapes. Water glasses that probably cost more than his daughter's backpack. He counted the tables as he followed the hostess toward the back. An old habit from the years he'd spent working construction sites, where knowing the layout of a space was just common sense. Marcus and the rest of them were already seated at a round table in the corner. 6 people total, including Ethan, Marcus Webb, and his wife Dana, their mutual friends Joel and Christine, and a woman Ethan had never seen before, seated slightly apart from the group in a way that suggested she'd arrived first and spent the last 10 minutes figuring out whether she had the right address. She was looking at her phone when he walked up. "There he is," Marcus announced, pushing back his chair a few inches as if preparing to stand, then deciding against it. "Ethan, buddy, glad you made it." "Traffic on the 94, Ethan said, pulling out the empty chair beside the woman he didn't know. "Sorry if I kept anyone waiting." "You didn't," the woman said without looking up from her phone. Her voice was calm, not cold, just settled, like someone who'd learned not to perform pleasantness for strangers. "This is Olivia," Christine said from across the table, with a tone that Ethan would later identify as the verbal equivalent of a stage whisper. "Olivia Bennett." Olivia set her phone face down on the table and looked at Ethan directly for the first time. She had dark eyes and the kind of composure that didn't come from comfort. It came from practice. There was something careful in the way she sat, shoulders back, spine straight, as if she was in a meeting she hadn't asked to attend but intended to get through professionally regardless. "Ethan Brooks," he said, extending his hand across the table. She shook it, firm grip, brief. "Nice to meet you," she said, and he believed her slightly less than he would have if she hadn't said it the exact way every person said it when they meant something else. Marcus was already waving a server over. "Okay, now that everyone's here, drinks first, obviously. Ethan, they've got an excellent bourbon selection if you're still into that." "I'm fine with whatever's on the table," Ethan said, gesturing toward the water pitcher. Joel, who was the kind of person who laughed a beat too early at his own observations, leaned forward with both elbows on the white tablecloth. "Look at that. You and Olivia already have something in common. Neither one of you wants to be here." Christine shot him a sideways look. Olivia picked up her water glass. "I don't mind being here," she said. "I just had a conference call that ran late. I'm catching up." Right. "What was that, the Singapore meeting?" Marcus asked, and there was something in his voice, a brightness that was almost theatrical, like he was running a talk show and Olivia was the guest he'd booked specifically because she made good television. "Seoul," she said. "See, that's... Ethan, isn't that wild? She had a meeting with Seoul tonight and still made it to dinner." Ethan looked at Marcus for a half second too long. "That's called a schedule," he said. "Most people have one." The table went mildly quiet. Marcus laughed, the practiced laugh of someone redirecting. Fair enough. "Okay, menus. Let's actually look at menus. Ethan opened his and stared at it without registering much. He was aware of Olivia beside him, not in a romantic way yet, just in the way you became aware of anyone seated next to you in a space that suddenly felt slightly too small. She was reading her own menu with the same focused attention she'd given her phone, and he had the impression she was the kind of person who read everything carefully and trusted nothing on the first pass. $42 for salmon. He flipped to the next page. "So, Ethan," Dana said. Marcus's wife, who was kind but had a habit of asking questions she'd clearly preloaded. "You're still doing the renovation work? Marcus mentioned you've been pretty busy." "Busier this year than last," Ethan said. "We picked up a couple of commercial contracts. Office build-outs mostly. It's steadier work." "That sounds like a lot of pressure," Christine offered. "Not more than anything else." He set his menu down. "Pressure's pretty relative." Joel refilled his own wine glass. "You know what I always say? Tradespeople have it figured out. No email at midnight, no board meetings." He said it with a grin that was meant to read as admiration but arrived as condescension, the way a lot of things Joel said did. Ethan kept his face neutral. "I get emails at midnight. My clients just use them to send me photos of water damage." A couple people laughed. Olivia didn't, but the corner of her mouth moved in a way that might have been something. The server came. Everyone ordered. Ethan picked the steak, not the cheapest thing on the menu and not the most expensive, a middle calculation he made without thinking about it too hard. And when the server turned to Olivia, she ordered a salad and something from the appetizer list, and Marcus immediately said, "That's it? Come on, Olivia, the company's paying." "I'm not particularly hungry," she said. "The company?" Joel repeated. "Figure of speech," Marcus said smoothly, in the way that meant it wasn't a figure of speech at all. Ethan glanced around the table. Something was slightly off about the whole arrangement. He'd felt it since he sat down, a low-grade wrongness he couldn't name yet. He knew Marcus well enough to know that Marcus didn't do anything casually. Every plan Marcus ever made had a secondary purpose, and dinners were no exception. But Ethan had figured the secondary purpose tonight was something simple and harmless. Maybe Marcus thought Ethan needed to get out more, which wasn't wrong. Maybe this was a setup, which he would have found awkward but manageable. He was only beginning to understand it was something else. "Olivia," Dana said, in the tone of someone opening a line of inquiry they'd been warming up, "Marcus tells us you've been running Bennett Tech for what, 4 years now?" 3.5, Olivia said. "That's remarkable. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" 30, Joel whistled softly. 30 years old and running a tech company. Your parents must be incredibly proud. Something shifted across Olivia's face, too fast for most people to catch it. Ethan caught it. "My parents aren't really in the picture," she said, with the measured flatness of someone who had answered that question too many times to let it reach them anymore. "Oh." Dana's face rearranged into sympathy. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Olivia said. "You didn't know." The table moved on, the way tables moved on from awkward moments. Someone made a comment about the wine. Someone asked about a vacation. Joel told a story about a client that went slightly too long, but Ethan kept returning to that half-second expression on Olivia's face, the controlled way she'd absorbed the question and answered it and put it away. That wasn't the face of someone who was fine. That was the face of someone who had gotten very good at performing fine. He recognized it because he'd worn it himself. Hooked. The food came, and the conversation shifted into the comfortable territory that dinner tables drifted toward when everyone had a glass in hand and something to eat. Work complaints, neighborhood gossip, the particular low-stakes grievances of people who were doing okay in life and occasionally needed to remind each other of that. Ethan ate and listened and spoke when someone asked him something directly. He was good at that. He'd spent enough years in rooms where he was the least polished person present to know how to sit in a space without needing to command it. Beside him, Olivia picked at her salad. She participated in the conversation when pulled in but didn't extend it. He got the sense she was enduring the evening rather than experiencing it. "Okay, real talk," Marcus said at one point, settling back in his chair with the air of a man who was about to say something he'd been holding since dessert was ordered. "Ethan, when's the last time you actually went on a date?" There it was. Ethan chewed his steak, put his fork down. Why? I'm just asking. Curiosity. You don't do curiosity, Marcus. You do angles. Dana covered a smile with her wine glass. I'm just saying, Marcus pressed on. You've been by yourself for what, 3 years now? Since Jenna left. And you've got Sophie, which is great. I know you're focused on her, but you're 32 years old. At some point, man, you have to... I know how old I am, Ethan said, not unkindly, but clearly. And Olivia, Christine jumped in, with an ease that told Ethan this was coordinated. You mentioned before dinner that you've been pretty isolated lately. Socially, I mean. Olivia looked at Christine for a moment. I said work has been demanding. Right, but socially. I have colleagues. That's not the same as... I know it's not the same, Olivia said quietly. The table settled into a particular kind of silence that Ethan recognized. The silence of people who had a script and were waiting for the scene they'd planned to start playing out. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Joel. He looked at Christine and Dana, who both had expressions that were trying to be casual and landing somewhere closer to anticipatory. These people had arranged this evening on purpose. Not as a genuine setup. He'd been on enough of those to know what that felt like. The good-natured awkwardness, the mutual embarrassment, the sincere if misguided hope. This felt like something with an audience built in, like they'd all agreed beforehand that watching Ethan Brooks, construction foreman and single father from the North Side, try to connect with Olivia Bennett, CEO of a company that employed 400 people, would be, what? Funny? Interesting? A story to tell later? He picked up his fork again, set it down again. How long have you been at Bennett Tech? He asked Olivia, ignoring the rest of the table. She looked at him with mild surprise. Since my father founded it. I started managing operations when I was 24, took over when I was 26. That's not 3.5 years then. No. A pause. I've been doing this work for 6 years. I've had the title for 3.5. There's a difference. A significant one, she said. Most people don't ask. Most people are more interested in the title. She studied him for a second. Yes, they are. Marcus, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone waiting for something to combust and finding the conversation an unexpected development, jumped back in. Well, the thing about Olivia is, and I say this with nothing but respect, she's basically married to her work. Which is impressive, obviously, but also means her personal life is sort of... Marcus. Ethan's voice was quiet. Marcus blinked. What? What are you doing right now? It's conversation. No, it's not. Ethan kept his voice even. He wasn't angry yet, just clear. You're describing her personal life to a table of people like she's not sitting right there. What are you doing? The table went entirely still. Marcus's expression cycled through several things, surprise, defensiveness, the brief flicker of actual shame, before settling on a laugh that didn't land. Come on, man. I'm not... It's fine, Olivia said. It's not, though, Ethan said. He looked at her. Is it? She met his eyes, held them for a moment. No, she said very quietly. It's not. Dinner continued because dinners continued even when they should stop. The table recalibrated. Marcus pulled the conversation towards safer ground. Sports, a renovation project someone was doing on their kitchen, Christine's new car. Ethan participated minimally and watched the mechanics of the evening with increasing clarity. What he was watching was something he recognized from job sites and from years of growing up in a neighborhood where social hierarchies were enforced through humor and the willingness to laugh at your own expense before someone else did. What he was watching was a group of moderately comfortable people who had assembled tonight to feel something: amusement, superiority, the warmth of being on the inside of a joke, and had chosen 2 other people to provide that feeling without asking permission. He thought about his daughter. Sophie was 9 years old and fiercely observant in the way that some kids were, the way that made you careful about what you showed them, because they would file it away and take it out later when you least expected. One of the things Ethan had worked hardest on, in the 5 years since her mother left, was making sure Sophie grew up understanding that cruelty packaged as humor was still cruelty, that laughing at someone's expense wasn't harmless, that you could always tell the difference between a joke everyone was in on and a joke that only ran one direction. He wondered what she would see if she could watch this table. He wondered what she would see him do. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Olivia during a lull in the larger conversation when Marcus and Joel were arguing about something sports-related. She looked at him. "You've been asking me things all night. You don't need to announce it." He almost smiled. "Fair enough. Do you actually know these people? Like, how well?" She considered the question. "Christine worked for me briefly, a couple of years ago. We stayed in loose touch. She invited me tonight and told me it was a group dinner with some people she wanted me to meet." A pause. "She said there was someone specific she thought I might connect with." "Did she say why?" Olivia's expression shifted into something dry. "She said he was good with his hands." Ethan stared at her. "I know," she said. "That's what she said." "That's what she said." He sat back. The absurdity of it, the particular flavor of condescension packed into that phrase, hit him in a way that was almost funny except for the fact that it was also absolutely what it appeared to be. His friends had looked at Olivia Bennett, her title, her money, whatever they imagined her life consisted of, and they'd decided to set her up with a handyman as an exercise in entertainment. "I'm a foreman," he said. "I know. Marcus mentioned it 4 times in the first 10 minutes you were gone." "What else did Marcus say while I wasn't here?" She tilted her head slightly. "That you'd had a rough few years, that you were a good person, but probably in over your head, that this evening would be—" She paused. "Interesting." He absorbed that. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this." "You didn't drag me into anything." "No, but I walked in here and sat down at this table without asking hard enough questions about why I was invited. That makes me part of the problem." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between evaluation and something softer, something that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Based on what Marcus told you?" "Based on all of it." He glanced at the rest of the table. Marcus and Joel were still deep in their argument. Dana was checking her phone. Christine was watching him and Olivia with an expression that he now recognized as the expression of someone who had staged a production and was watching the actors go off script. "If I asked you to leave this restaurant with me right now," he said, "would that be the weirdest thing that happened to you this week?" She was quiet for a moment. "This week, yes. This month, probably not." That's a depressing answer. It's an honest one. "Fair enough." He picked up his napkin, set it on the table beside his plate. "For what it's worth, I'm not asking because I think this dinner is funny or because I want a story to tell. I'm asking because I think we're both sitting here letting other people decide how our evening goes, and we don't have to do that." Olivia looked at him for a long time. The background noise of the restaurant filled the space between them. Silverware, low music, the polite murmur of other people's conversations. "What would we do instead?" she asked. "Coffee, probably. I know a place that's open late and doesn't charge $42 for a piece of fish." Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "That's a very specific reference." "I looked at the menu in the window on my way in. Force of habit." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she picked up her own napkin and placed it deliberately beside her plate. Joel was the one who noticed first. He tapped Marcus on the arm mid-sentence, and Marcus looked over, and the table fell quiet in stages as everyone registered Ethan and Olivia both straightening in their chairs with the particular body language of people who had made a decision. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "Fine," Ethan said. "We're going to head out." A beat of silence. "Both of you?" Christine said. "Both of us," Olivia said. Ethan had started to pull his wallet out when Olivia put her hand briefly on the table near him, not touching him, just close enough to be a signal. "I have it," she said quietly. He looked at her. "For both of us," she added. "Don't argue." He thought about arguing, then he put his wallet back. There was a particular kind of pride that he'd spent years examining honestly, the kind that dressed itself up as integrity, but was really just the refusal to accept anything that might create an imbalance. and he'd gotten better at knowing the difference. Letting someone pay for his dinner one time was not a debt. It was just dinner. "Thank you," he said. "Don't make it a thing," she said. Marcus was watching all of this with an expression Ethan couldn't quite classify. Something between confusion and a vague, dawning discomfort. "You're seriously leaving?" "We are," Ethan said. He pushed back his chair and stood, and Olivia did the same, with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd ended meetings her whole career and knew exactly how much acknowledgement a room deserved on the way out. "Ethan, man, come on. It's a nice place," Ethan said, looking at Marcus with something that wasn't anger but wasn't warmth either, just clarity. "You should enjoy it." Christine's expression had moved all the way into something like mortification. Dana was very carefully studying a spot on the tablecloth. Joel was doing the thing he always did when a social situation turned uncomfortable, which was pretending to be fascinated by his wine. Olivia paused at the edge of the table. She looked at Christine for a moment. Just a moment, and it wasn't cruel, it wasn't dramatic. It was just the look of someone who had filed a data point away. Then she turned and walked toward the front of the restaurant, and Ethan fell into step beside her, and behind them the table stayed absolutely still and absolutely quiet, in the way that tables got when the joke had stopped being funny. The night air outside Marble and Vine was cold in the clean, direct way of late autumn. Not bitter yet, just present. Olivia stopped on the sidewalk and pulled her coat more tightly around herself, and Ethan stood beside her and waited while she got her bearings. "That was—" she started. "Yeah," he said. "I almost didn't come tonight." "What made you?" She thought about it. "Christine said it would be good for me to get out. And I believed her, which I probably shouldn't have." A pause. "I don't get out much." "I can tell," he said, and then immediately, "That came out wrong." "No," she said. "It didn't, actually." She looked at the street, at the slow movement of cars and the lit windows of other restaurants, other lives going on in parallel. "I'm good at my job and I'm bad at this," she said. "Socializing, being around people who aren't colleagues. It's not shyness. She paused. "I don't know how to be in a room where I'm not in charge of something. I don't know what I'm supposed to contribute." He considered that. "You don't have to contribute anything," he said. "That's kind of the point of a conversation that isn't a meeting." She glanced at him sideways. "What's the coffee place?" "About 6 blocks north. It's nothing impressive. Vinyl booths, bad lighting, pie that's genuinely good, coffee that's consistently mediocre. My daughter and I go on Saturday mornings sometimes." "You have a daughter." "Sophie. She's 9. He started walking north slowly, giving her the option to not follow without making it a thing. She fell into step beside him. "She was very specific this morning about what I should wear tonight. She has opinions about my clothes that are much stronger than my opinions about my clothes." "What did she pick?" He glanced down at himself. "This. Which I gather is better than what I would have chosen on my own." "She did okay," Olivia said. They walked in silence for half a block, the comfortable kind that didn't need to be filled. Two strangers who'd been thrown together by people with bad intentions and had managed somehow to land in the same direction. "Your parents," he said carefully. "You don't have to answer this." "They're gone," she said, and her voice was steady. "My mother died when I was 12. My father died 2 years ago. Bennett Tech was his. I inherited it, and I've been running it since." "That's a lot to carry." "It is." She said it plainly, without performance. "People look at me and see the company and the title and the money, and they think those things are the story. But they're not. They're the result of the story. The story is harder and less impressive and wouldn't make good dinner conversation." "I'd listen to it." She looked at him. "Not tonight," he said. "I'm not trying to mine your history at 9:30 on a Tuesday. I'm just saying I'd actually listen, if you wanted to talk about it." The coffee shop appeared ahead, its window yellowed with light that wasn't flattering to anyone but made everyone look like they were somewhere they belonged. Through the glass, Ethan could see a couple of occupied booths, a counter with stools, a bored server refilling napkin holders. He pulled the door open. Olivia stepped inside and stopped just past the threshold, looking around the place. The worn vinyl, the laminated menus, the glass case with 3 remaining slices of pie. "You were right," she said. "It's nothing impressive." "I told you." She moved toward a booth in the back corner, out of habit or instinct, the way people who spent their lives managing information move toward positions that let them see the whole room. He followed her and sat across from her, and the server appeared with a tired efficiency that Ethan found refreshing after the studied performance of Marble and Vine. "Coffee?" the server asked. "Please," they said, at the same time. She glanced at him. He glanced at her. "Pie?" he asked. "What kind?" "Apple's the one worth having," he said. She looked at the server. "Apple pie, please." The server nodded and disappeared. Outside, the city moved through its Tuesday night routines. People going home, people going out, people in between. Inside the coffee shop, in a booth with yellowed light and vinyl seats and coffee that was going to be consistently mediocre, Ethan Brooks and Olivia Bennett sat across from each other and began, slowly and without ceremony, the actual evening. It wasn't what either of them had planned. It wasn't what anyone at that round table in the corner of Marble and Vine had expected. It was just two people, tired of being the material for someone else's story, starting to figure out what their own might look like. The coffee arrived. It was bad, exactly as promised. Olivia wrapped both hands around her mug and looked across the table at him with an expression that was tentative and real and not performing anything. "Tell me about Sophie," she said. And Ethan, who had spent 3 years protecting his daughter from every wrong thing and every wrong person and every situation that smelled even slightly like it might hurt her, leaned back in the vinyl booth and started talking about his kid. The arguments about bedtime, the phase where she'd been obsessed with documentaries about deep-sea creatures, the drawing she'd taped to the refrigerator that she'd titled Dad Working, which was mostly a hard hat and a coffee cup and a smudge that was apparently him. He talked about her the way he only talked about her when he was sure the person listening actually wanted to hear it and wasn't just being polite. Olivia listened with her coffee mug between both hands and her eyes on him, and she didn't check her phone once. Outside, a Tuesday in November moved toward midnight. Inside the coffee shop, the pie was better than it had any right to be. They stayed until the server came by a second time with the check without being asked, which was the polite way of saying the place was closing. Ethan paid. Olivia had paid for dinner, he told her. That was already the deal. She wasn't paying for bad coffee, too. And they stood on the sidewalk outside for a few minutes while they waited for her car service. They had talked for nearly 2 hours about his daughter and his work and the particular weight of raising a child alone, not out of tragedy, but out of circumstance, and how the hardest part wasn't the practical difficulties, but the moments when Sophie needed someone to talk to who wasn't him. Because sometimes you loved someone too much to also be their whole world. About her company and what it meant to inherit something that was supposed to be someone else's legacy, and spend years trying to figure out where your own legacy began. About loneliness, which they'd approached sideways without naming it directly until somewhere around the second coffee, when Olivia had said something about the quiet that lived in large houses, and he'd said something about Saturday mornings that were too quiet when Sophie was at her grandmother's. And they'd both understood without elaborating that they were talking about the same thing. Her car pulled up, a black sedan, unremarkable. She looked at it for a moment, then at him. "I want to say that was unexpected," she said. But I don't think it was, actually. I think tonight went exactly the way it was supposed to, just not the version they planned." She glanced toward the street. "Thank you for not being what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who was intimidated by me, or someone who wasn't, in the wrong way." He considered that. "There's a right way?" "There is," she said. "It looks like this." She got in the car. The door closed. Ethan stood on the sidewalk and watched the sedan pull into traffic and disappear around the corner, and then stood there a moment longer in the cold November air, hands in his jacket pockets. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Dude, what was that?" He looked at it for a few seconds, put his phone back in his pocket without answering. He started walking toward where he'd parked his truck. Above the city, the sky was the particular dark gray of urban nights. Too much light pollution for stars, but not entirely lightless either. Somewhere between things, the way nights sometimes were. He thought about what Olivia had said. "It looks like this." He thought about his daughter, who was at her grandmother's tonight, who would want to hear about the dinner in the morning in the way that 9-year-olds always wanted debriefs, who would ask too many questions and draw conclusions that were occasionally uncomfortably accurate. He thought about the coffee, which had genuinely been terrible, and about the apple pie, which had genuinely been good. He reached his truck, got in, sat for a moment in the quiet. His phone buzzed again. Different number this time. He looked at the screen. "This is Olivia Bennett, in case you want to have bad coffee again sometime. O.B." He read it twice. Then he set the phone on the passenger seat and started the truck and pulled out into traffic. And he didn't respond yet because some things deserved a moment before you answered them. But he was smiling. He didn't examine it too closely. He just drove home. He didn't respond to her text until the next morning. Not because he was playing a game. He wasn't wired for games, had never had the patience for the particular kind of performance that dating in your 30s sometimes demanded, where you waited exactly long enough to seem busy, but not so long that you seemed disinterested. He didn't respond because when he got home that night, Sophie was still awake despite being at his mother's, who had apparently decided that a Tuesday night was a reasonable occasion for a 9-year-old to stay up past 10 watching nature documentaries, and his mother had handed him the phone with the serene expression of a woman who had raised 3 children and considered herself beyond reproach. "She wanted to talk to you," his mother said. "It's 10:15, Ethan said. "She has things to say." Sophie had things to say. Specifically, had he worn the shirt she'd picked? Had the restaurant been fancy? Had he ordered something good? Or had he done the thing where he ordered whatever was cheapest? And had he talked to anyone interesting? Or had he just sat there being quiet the way he sometimes did at parties? He told her yes to the shirt, yes to the fancy, that he'd ordered steak and it was fine, and that he'd talked to someone. "Someone," Sophie repeated with the precision of a child who understood subtext. "A person," he said. "At the dinner." "A person like a woman?" "Sophie, I'm just asking." "Go to sleep." "Was she nice?" He'd paused at that. Through the phone, he could hear the particular silence of his mother's house, the old furnace ticking, the muted sound of something on television in the next room. She was real, he said, which wasn't the same as nice, and he knew it, but it was the truest thing he could say, in 12 words or fewer to a 9-year-old at 10:15 on a Tuesday. Sophie had apparently decided that was acceptable, because she said goodnight and hung up, and Ethan had driven home and gone to bed and not looked at Olivia's text again until 6:42 the following morning, when he was standing in his kitchen in yesterday's socks waiting for coffee to finish. He read it again. "This is Olivia Bennett, in case you want to have bad coffee again sometime. O.B." The initials at the end were very her, he thought, the deliberate formality of signing a casual text. He could picture exactly the expression she'd had when she typed it. That careful composure, the slight hedge built into in case you want, which gave her an exit if he didn't respond without making the reach itself feel like a risk. He typed, "The coffee was bad. The pie was worth it. When are you free?" He hit send before he could think about it too carefully, which was how he made most of his better decisions. Her response came 4 minutes later. "Friday evening. I have a meeting until 6:30. I can do 7. He wrote back, "7 works. Somewhere with better coffee this time, or are we committed to the bit?" "Somewhere better," she wrote, "but not $42 for fish." "Deal," he wrote. He poured his coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where the last of the autumn leaves had come down and were doing nothing impressive against the fence. It was a Wednesday morning in November. He had a crew starting at 7:30 on an office build-out in the warehouse district. He had a school pickup at 3:15. He had, apparently, plans on Friday. He drank his coffee. It was good. He'd learned to make good coffee years ago because the alternative was mornings that started badly, and mornings set the whole day's tone. He didn't tell Marcus about the texts. Marcus called on Wednesday afternoon while Ethan was on site watching a junior carpenter measure the same threshold 3 times because he kept second-guessing himself. Ethan let it go to voicemail, which Marcus had expected because he left a message. "Look, man, I want to explain. Call me when you can." It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Ethan listened to it, standing outside in the cold with a coffee cup that had gone lukewarm, and then he deleted it. He wasn't angry at Marcus, not exactly. He'd known Marcus Webb for 11 years, and he understood who Marcus was. A fundamentally decent person with a blind spot about the difference between being entertaining and being kind. Marcus had arranged that dinner because he'd thought it would make a good story, not because he'd wanted to genuinely hurt anyone. That didn't make it right, but it meant the anger Ethan felt had a ceiling on it, a limited altitude beyond which it wasn't worth climbing. What bothered him more than the anger was the clarity. Seeing something clearly about a person you'd known for years had a particular discomfort to it, not because the thing you saw was new, but because you'd been half seeing it for a long time and choosing not to look directly at it. He called Marcus back on Thursday morning. "I wasn't trying to humiliate either of you," Marcus said, before Ethan had fully finished his sentence about the call. "I know that. It was supposed to be... I thought it would be interesting. Two people who wouldn't normally..." "Marcus," Ethan kept his voice even, "you looked at a woman who runs a 400-person company and you thought it would be entertaining to watch her interact with someone you'd already decided was beneath her. That's what happened. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying that's what happened." A long silence. Then, "That's not how I thought about it." "I know it's not. That's the part worth thinking about." Another silence, shorter. Marcus said, Did something happen after you left? With her?" "That's not your business." "Right." A pause. "Yeah, fair enough." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, a game, a mutual friend's work situation, and hung up without resolving anything, which was how those conversations usually ended. Some things didn't resolve cleanly. They just settled over time, like sediment. Friday arrived the way Fridays in late November arrived, gray and purposeful, the week already used up, the weekend still hypothetical. Ethan picked Sophie up at 3:15, fed her dinner at 5:30 because she had strong opinions about the timing of meals and would become a fundamentally different person if food was delayed more than 20 minutes past her expected window, and dropped her at his mother's by 6. His mother raised an eyebrow at the jacket. "It's a jacket," Ethan said. "It's the nice one," his mother said. "I have 2 jackets." "I know you have 2 jackets. That's the nice one." Sophie appeared in the hallway behind his mother with the expression of a child who had been listening from the other room and felt she had a right to weigh in. "It's a good choice," she said. "I'm glad you both approve," Ethan said. "I'll be back by 10. "We'll be up," his mother said, which meant they'd be watching something on television and would absolutely interrogate him upon return. He drove to the restaurant Olivia had suggested, a Thai place in the near north side that he had driven past dozens of times and never gone into, the kind of place that looked too small from the outside and turned out to have twice as many tables as you expected. She was already there when he arrived, which he was beginning to understand was simply how she operated. She arrived first because she controlled what she could control. And one of the things she controlled was not being the person who walked into a room and had to find someone already sitting. She was in a different kind of clothes than the dinner on Tuesday. Still polished, but less so. Like she'd come from the office, but changed something on the way. Dark blouse, less formal. She looked up when he walked in, and something in her face shifted in a way that he noticed and filed away without commenting on. "You found it," she said. "It wasn't hard to find. Some people have trouble with the parking. I parked 2 blocks over." He sat down across from her. "How was the 6:30 meeting?" She picked up her menu. "Quarterly financial review. 3 hours of people explaining things I already knew in language that was designed to make it sound like they'd discovered it." "That sounds exhausting." "It's consistent." She didn't look up from the menu. "I've started bringing a second notebook to those meetings. One for actual notes, one for..." She paused. "For?" "For drawing," she said, with a tone that suggested she wasn't sure why she'd admitted that. "Geometric shapes, mostly. It keeps my hands busy so my face doesn't do things it shouldn't." He looked at her over his own menu. "That's the most relatable thing you've said." She glanced up. "It's extremely unprofessional." "It's extremely human," he said. "Those are different things." She held his gaze for a second and then looked back at her menu, but her posture had changed slightly. Not relaxed exactly, but less braced, like something that had been held at a particular tension had eased by half a degree. They ordered. The food was good in the way that good Thai food was good. direct and confident, nothing apologizing for itself. They talked through dinner with the specific ease of two people who had already gotten through the most awkward part on Tuesday and were now building on that foundation, which meant the conversation moved faster and went deeper, dipping in and out of serious and light in the way conversations did when both people were paying genuine attention. He told her about his ex-wife, Jenna. Not the whole story, not then, but the outline. High school sweethearts who'd grown in different directions. A divorce that had been sad rather than vicious. A custody arrangement that had eventually settled into something workable because they'd both loved their daughter more than they'd resented each other. He told her about the specific difficulty of the first year, not as a sob story, but as a fact, because it had been difficult, and pretending otherwise would have been the kind of smoothing over he tried to avoid. Olivia listened without interrupting, without making it smaller than it was. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Sophie knows her mother?" she asked. "Every other weekend, and summers half the time. It's not perfect, but it works." He set his fork down. "She's doing fine. Better than fine most days. Kids are—" He searched for the right word. "Kids are more adaptable than adults give them credit for. What breaks them is usually not the thing you're afraid of. It's the smaller things you don't see coming." Olivia nodded slowly. "My mother's death was like that," she said. "The obvious impact, the missing her, the grief. I'd prepared myself for that, or I thought I had. What I hadn't prepared for was my father becoming someone I didn't know how to talk to anymore." She picked up her water glass. "He didn't know how to raise a daughter without her. He was a brilliant man and an exceptional engineer, and he genuinely had no idea what to do with a 12-year-old girl who was sad in ways he couldn't fix." "What did he do?" "He taught me the business," she said. "That's what he knew, so he taught me that." A pause. "I don't think he meant it as a substitute for parenting. I think he was doing the best he could with what he had. But the effect was that I grew up understanding capital allocation and market positioning better than I understood how to make friends." "And now you run the company." "And now I run the company." She said it without pride or resentment, just statement. "And I'm 30 years old and I can manage a board of directors, and I cannot, apparently, get through a social dinner without someone deciding it's their project." "People look at you and they see a category," he said. "That's their problem, not yours." "I know that intellectually," she said. "Knowing a thing and not feeling it anyway are different accomplishments." "Yeah," he said. "They are." The restaurant had thinned out around them while they talked, the way restaurants did on Friday nights when the early crowd gave way to the late crowd, and there was a 20-minute gap of relative quiet in between. A server refilled their water. Someone near the window was celebrating a birthday with enough low-key enthusiasm that it was audible without being intrusive. "Can I ask you something," Olivia said, "that might be too forward?" "Go ahead." "You're 32. You have a 9-year-old daughter and a business you built. You seem like someone who has his priorities clearly arranged." She studied him. "Why does it feel like you've been waiting for something you haven't named yet?" He didn't answer immediately. He thought about it. Actually thought about it. Not the polished version he could have given. Not the self-sufficient single-father narrative that was true, but not complete. "Sophie's mother and I," he started, "we ended without a big fight. No infidelity, no cruelty, just... We looked at each other one day and realized we'd been trying to get back to something that had stopped existing 2 years earlier. And that was honest, and it was the right thing to do, and it hurt anyway." He looked at the table, then back up at her. "After that, I put everything into Sophie and the business, because those were the things I could actually affect. And I told myself I was fine with that. And mostly I was." A pause. "But mostly isn't the same as fully." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "That's a very honest answer." "You asked an honest question." She nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who had asked expecting a deflection and had received something else entirely and was recalibrating. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I want to be direct about that up front. I don't have a natural mode for this kind of thing. I'll probably overanalyze things. I'll probably get in my own way." "I'm not great at asking for help," he said. "I'll probably not say things I should say because I'm used to figuring things out alone. I'll probably let things go too long before addressing them. So we're both warning each other." "Seems fair," he said. She picked up her water glass and held it for a moment, not drinking, just holding. Most people try to present their best version at this stage. I know, he said, but I've done that, and it costs a lot and it doesn't work, and I'm too tired for it. He looked at her steadily. I'd rather you know what you're actually dealing with from the start. She looked back at him. Outside, the November night pressed against the restaurant windows, cold and patient. Inside, Claude's response was interrupted. Try again. They saw each other twice more in November. Once for coffee. Better coffee this time. A place Ethan knew near the river that roasted its own beans and took the process seriously enough to be slightly annoying about it, which Olivia found entertaining in a dry way she didn't bother concealing. Once for a walk through a Saturday farmer's market that Ethan had been going to for years, and that Olivia had never been to despite living 4 miles away, which she admitted with a self-awareness that was becoming one of his favorite things about her. The way she acknowledged her own gaps without apology and without performance. She bought a jar of honey at the farmer's market. He bought apples. They stood at the edge of the market eating samples of something a vendor described as artisanal jam, and that tasted exactly like regular jam, and Olivia said, I think artisanal might just mean expensive. And he said, I think you're right. And neither of them was trying to be funny, but they both laughed. And it was the laugh of two people becoming comfortable inside a shared frequency. What he noticed, across those 3 weeks, was how much effort she put into not letting her guard down, and how it dropped anyway, incrementally, in the specific moments she wasn't monitoring herself. She'd be in the middle of talking about something, a board decision, a problem at work, a memory from her 20s, and she'd say something unguarded and honest, and then catch herself and recalibrate, as if she'd stepped too close to an edge and needed to step back. He never called attention to it. He just logged it the way you log the structural details of a building. Not to exploit them, but because understanding how something was built told you how to be around it without causing damage. December arrived without much ceremony. The city put up its lights, which Ethan thought were better some years than others. This was a middle year. Sophie met Olivia for the first time on a Saturday afternoon in early December, which happened the way genuinely significant things often happened. Not through careful orchestration, but because a plan fell apart and the simplest solution involved the thing you'd been cautiously avoiding. Ethan had arranged to meet Olivia for coffee at 11. His mother, who was supposed to have Sophie for the morning, called at 9:45 with a kitchen situation involving a burst pipe that was going to absorb her entire day and possibly her entire week's goodwill toward plumbing in general. He texted Olivia. Something came up. I need to bring my daughter. We can reschedule if that's easier. Her response came after 2 minutes. Bring her. I'll see you at 11. He stared at the text for a moment. He'd been half hoping she'd say reschedule, not because he didn't want her to meet Sophie, but because he'd wanted to manage the conditions more carefully, to have the introduction happen in a context he'd thought about rather than one that had fallen together by accident. He'd been protecting that boundary with a deliberateness that Sophie herself would have identified immediately as overthinking, if he'd explained it to her. He told Sophie they were meeting someone for coffee. Sophie asked if it was the woman from Tuesday. He said yes. Sophie said nothing, which from a 9-year-old who had opinions about everything was its own form of verdict, and went to find her shoes. Olivia was at a corner table when they arrived. She was looking at her phone, and she put it down when she saw them come through the door, not with the practiced speed of someone putting away a distraction, but with the deliberate courtesy of someone deciding that whatever was on the screen mattered less than what was in front of her. Sophie saw her and stopped walking for half a second. Ethan felt it in the slight hesitation of the small hand he was still holding, though she'd been telling him for a year that she was too old to hold hands in public. She'd made an exception today without comment, which told him more about her nerves than she was willing to say out loud. This is Olivia, Ethan said. Olivia, this is Sophie. Olivia looked at Sophie with the kind of directness she gave everyone, not performing warmth, not manufacturing the particular cooing softness that some adults deployed around children, just looking at her the same way she looked at anyone whose measure she was taking. Hi, Sophie said. Hi, Olivia said. Your dad says you have strong opinions about his wardrobe. Sophie blinked. Then she looked at Ethan. You told her that? It's come up. That's... Sophie pulled out the chair next to Olivia, apparently deciding that processing her indignation and sitting down were not mutually exclusive activities. I just have eyes, she said. Someone has to use them. Something crossed Olivia's face, too quick for a full smile, but in the same neighborhood. That's fair, she said. They ordered. Sophie got hot chocolate with the focused deliberateness of a person who had checked the menu and verified that the establishment met her minimum acceptable standards, and she asked the server 3 follow-up questions about whether it was made with real milk and what kind of chocolate, which the server handled with a patience that suggested they'd answered those questions before. Olivia ordered black coffee and did not comment on Sophie's interrogation, which Ethan filed away as a point in her favor. For the first 20 minutes, Sophie was quiet in the way that quiet, observant children were quiet. Not withdrawn, just collecting data. She answered questions when asked them, ate half a scone, and watched Olivia with the peripheral attention of someone pretending to look at something else. At some point, while Ethan was at the counter asking about a refill, Sophie said something to Olivia that he didn't hear. By the time he came back, they were in the middle of a conversation about deep-sea creatures, specifically about the anglerfish and its bioluminescent lure, and Olivia was describing something about deep-sea pressure with the kind of precise, unselfconscious engagement of someone who had apparently retained a significant amount of marine biology from somewhere and wasn't thinking about whether it was appropriate to deliver it to a 9-year-old. The pressure at the deepest parts of the ocean, Olivia was saying, is about 1,000 times what we feel on the surface. So the fish down there have bodies that evolved specifically to exist under conditions that would kill almost everything else. Sophie was leaning forward with her elbows on the table. Do they feel the pressure? They're adapted to it, so not the way we would. To them, it's just normal. Olivia paused. It's only catastrophic if they're removed from it. Bring them up too fast and the change kills them. That's kind of sad, Sophie said. Or it's just their biology, Olivia said. It's not sad from their perspective. It's just what they are. Sophie considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I guess that makes sense, she said. Ethan sat down and set his coffee on the table and looked between them and said nothing. He'd had a version in his head of how this introduction might go. Awkward in specific ways, requiring specific management. And whatever this was, it wasn't that version. On the walk back to the car, Sophie took his hand again and didn't say anything for half a block. Then she said, "She knows a lot about fish." "She reads a lot," Ethan said. "She doesn't pretend," Sophie said. "Some adults pretend to think what you say is interesting. She actually thought it was interesting." He looked down at his daughter. "How do you know?" Sophie gave him the look she'd been giving him since she was approximately 6, the look that said she was working with information he didn't have access to. "Because she didn't do the face," she said. He didn't ask what face. He knew what face. And up. January was when things got harder, which Ethan had half expected. Nothing with real weight moved in a straight line, and whatever this was between him and Olivia, still undefined, still cautious, still building itself in the incremental way that things built when both people involved had been bruised by previous constructions, it had real weight. He could feel that clearly. The difficulty in January arrived in the shape of a man named Richard Hale. Richard Hale was Bennett Tech's largest outside investor, and had been for 6 years. He was 61, divorced twice, the kind of man who wore his wealth the way some men wore their height, as a fact of nature that he'd decided to treat as a personal virtue. He sat on the company's advisory board, which meant he had influence without authority, which was a combination that, in Ethan's experience, produced the most difficult people in any room because they had enough access to cause friction, but none of the accountability that came with actual responsibility. Olivia mentioned Richard Hale for the first time in January, during a phone call on a Tuesday night when Ethan was doing the dishes and Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table and half listening to both conversations simultaneously, as was her custom. "He's been pushing to have a larger role in operational decisions," Olivia said, "which is not his role. His role is advisory." "What kind of larger role?" Ethan asked, moving Sophie's empty juice glass to the rack. "He wants to be consulted before major hiring decisions. He sent a memo to 2 of my senior directors." A pause. "Not to me. To them. That's deliberate." "Obviously it's deliberate." Her voice had the particular flatness it got when she was controlling something. He's trying to create parallel communication channels because he thinks if he can get my directors to start reporting to him informally, the actual authority lines become blurry. Have you talked to him directly? Not yet. I'm deciding how. What are your options? I can address it formally, which creates a documented record and also signals to the board that there's internal friction, which I don't want. Or I can address it informally and directly, which is faster but gives him the opportunity to claim there was a misunderstanding. She was quiet for a moment. He's been doing small things like this for 2 years. Nothing individually significant enough to confront. Cumulatively, it's a pattern. Ethan thought about this while he dried a plate. He knew something about managing people who were trying to undermine your authority without doing anything technically wrong. He'd dealt with it on job sites, with subcontractors who tested boundaries the same way, incrementally, deniably. The solution was almost always the same: be clearer than the situation required, earlier than felt necessary. Document everything, he said. Everything he sends to your people, every meeting, every informal comment, if you can reconstruct it. Not because you'll necessarily use it, but because having the record changes your leverage in the conversation. I've been doing that, she said. Then you already know what to do. You're asking because you want someone to tell you it's okay to be direct. A pause. Then, that's annoyingly accurate. You're the CEO, he said. Your company, your call. I know that, she said, but her voice had loosened slightly, the way it did when she'd been carrying something alone and had set it down, just briefly, in a shared space. Sophie looked up from her homework. Is that Olivia? She whispered. He pointed at her paper. She made a face and looked back down. Ethan visited Bennett Tech's offices for the first time on a Saturday morning in late January. Olivia had mentioned once, early in December, that she sometimes went in on Saturdays when the building was quiet, not because the work demanded it, but because she thought better without other people in adjacent rooms. He'd filed that away. When she'd said, carefully and without elaborating, that she'd like him to see the place, he'd understood the invitation for what it was. She was showing him something she didn't usually show people. Not the company as a performance of success, but the company as the thing she'd built her life around, the thing that was both hers and never quite hers. And she wanted him to see it with the same directness she'd been trying, haltingly, to bring to everything else. The building was downtown, a mid-rise with good bones and the kind of renovated industrial interior that Ethan could appreciate from a structural standpoint, regardless of anything else. He met her in the lobby and she showed him in the way someone showed you their home when they'd cleaned it, but were still a little uncertain about what you'd think. Organized, deliberate, watching his face for reactions she was pretending not to look for. She showed him the engineering floor, which was empty on a Saturday and smelled like electronics and cold coffee. She showed him the project room where the product team worked, with its whiteboard walls covered in diagrams and timelines, and someone's abandoned sticky note system. She showed him her own office last, which was at the corner of the building and had windows on 2 sides, which she'd clearly chosen not for the status of the corner, but for the light. He stood in her office and looked around, and she stood near her desk watching him look. The office was functional rather than impressive. Good furniture, but not extravagant. A few framed things on the wall, not art exactly, more technical. What looked like an engineering diagram, a photograph of a circuit board blown up large enough to look architectural. Her desk had 3 monitors and a neat stack of folders, and in the corner, the secondary notebook she'd mentioned, the one she drew in during meetings. He pointed at it. Can I? She looked at the notebook, then at him, with an expression he couldn't entirely read. It's not. They're just shapes. I know. Can I? A pause, then. Yeah. He picked it up and flipped through it. Geometric shapes, she'd said, and that was accurate. Complex interlocking patterns, precise and repetitive, the kind of thing hands did when a mind needed somewhere to go. Some pages were dense with them. Some had only a few marks, which told him those had been the meetings where she'd needed to use her face after all. These are good, he said. They're just shapes. They're organized. You make them organized. He looked at a page that had concentric hexagons, each one precisely spaced. You do this when you're stressed? When I'm bored or managing? She crossed her arms loosely. When I need something for my hands to do so the rest of me can hold still. He set the notebook back on the corner of her desk. He looked around the office again. The light, the monitors, the engineering print on the wall. Outside the windows, the city was a January Saturday gray, the kind of gray that was committed to itself. Your father picked the company name, he said. It wasn't a question. He'd put it together from things she'd said. Yes, she said, but the company now, the way it runs, the culture, that's you. She was quiet for a moment. I changed a lot when I took over. Some things he built that weren't working. Processes, some of the culture. She paused. He was brilliant at the technical side. He was less careful about people. And you're more careful about people. I try to be. She said it without sentimentality. I'm not always successful. I'm not naturally warm. I know that about myself. Warm and careful are different things, he said. You're careful. That's not nothing. She looked at him with the expression he'd started to recognize as the one she got when he said something that landed somewhere she hadn't expected. Not quite surprised, so she was too composed for surprise to show cleanly, but a recalibration, a slight shift in the set of her shoulders. You see things differently than most people, she said. Not differently, he said. Just directly. I don't have a lot of patience for getting from A to B through all the letters in between. That should be an annoying quality. It probably is sometimes. It's not, she said. It's not annoying. It's... She stopped. What? He said. She looked at him for a moment. It's restful, she said finally, with the tone of someone admitting something they'd been processing for a while. Being around you is restful. I didn't have a word for it before. He held that. Olivia, he said. I know, she said before he finished. I'm not... I know, she said again, more quietly. I'm not moving fast. I don't do things without thinking about them first. You know that about me by now. I know that, he said. But I also know when something is real, she said. And this is real. Whatever it is. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said most true things. I just want you to know that I know that. He crossed the office and stood beside her at the windows, looking out at the city. Not touching, just close, in the way that two people were close when they were figuring out what the next version of close looked like. Outside, the January sky sat gray and low over the buildings. Down on the street, the occasional car moved through light that was flat and diffuse and somehow still bright enough to read by. Richard Hale, he said, after a while. She exhaled through her nose. What about him? He's going to be a problem. He's already a problem. A bigger one, Ethan said. People like that, they escalate when they feel like they're being managed. He's going to push harder before it resolves. He paused. I want you to know that whatever that looks like, it doesn't change where I stand. She turned to look at him. I'm telling you now, he said, because it'll be harder to say later when things are actually happening and there's noise. I wanted to say it when it was quiet. She studied him with the careful attention she gave things that mattered to her. You think it's going to get bad? I think people who've had something a long time and feel it slipping get desperate, he said. And desperate people make things messy for everyone around them. I've seen it on job sites, in contracts, in families. It's just how people are. He looked at her. I just wanted you to not be surprised when it does, and to know I'm not going anywhere. She didn't respond immediately. She turned back to the window. Outside, a gust moved through the street, pushing a scrap of something across the empty sidewalk. My last relationship, she said slowly, ended because the person decided that the company and its problems were too much to be adjacent to. He said it very kindly and very reasonably. A pause. He wasn't wrong exactly. The company does consume things. It consumed that. She was quiet for a moment. I'd made myself believe that was just the cost of the work, that choosing the work meant choosing to be alone. And now? She looked at him sideways. And now I'm standing in my office on a Saturday morning telling a man who builds things for a living about my investor problems, and he's listening like it matters to him. She paused, which is not something I'd modeled. Maybe your model was too limited, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. Maybe, she said. They stood at the window a while longer, the two of them, in the particular quiet of a building on a Saturday when the work was paused and the week's noise hadn't arrived yet. It wasn't comfortable in a finished way. There were too many things still unmade between them for that. But it was honest, and it was solid, and those were things that Ethan trusted more than comfort. Richard Hale made his move in February. Not the way Ethan had expected, not a direct confrontation or a board vote or anything with clean edges. The way Richard Hale made his move was by talking. Specifically, by talking to the two journalists he had relationships with, neither of whom covered tech seriously, but both of whom had platforms with enough reach to create noise. What they published, within 4 days of each other, were not stories exactly. They were items, mentions, a piece about leadership uncertainty at Bennett Tech, a quote from an unnamed source about questions around long-term vision. Nothing provable, nothing actionable, nothing that could be traced back to a single origin. Olivia called Ethan at 7 in the morning on a Wednesday when the second item appeared. "He's trying to create a narrative," she said. Her voice was controlled, but just barely. He could hear the tight management underneath it, the effort of keeping everything calibrated. If he can get enough noise going, it affects the next funding round. And if the funding round gets complicated, the board starts asking questions. And if the board starts asking questions, he gets the leverage he's been trying for, Ethan said. Yes. He was sitting at his kitchen table with his first coffee, still in yesterday's sweatshirt. Through the window, February was doing what February did. What's your legal position? Clean. Everything we publish is accurate. All our financials are in order. He can't create a real scandal because there isn't one. She paused. But he doesn't need a scandal. He needs uncertainty. Uncertainty is enough. Okay, Ethan said. So you don't fight the story. You make the story irrelevant. How? You control the larger narrative, he said. Not in response to him. That gives him the frame. You're already ahead of him. Show the board, show the market that you've been ahead of this for months. Make his noise look like static against something that was already moving. She was quiet for a moment. You know, she said, that's not different from what my comms team has been recommending. Then maybe your comms team is right. Maybe. A brief pause. I keep looking for the thing they're missing. Sometimes there isn't a thing, he said. Sometimes the obvious play is just the play. A longer silence. He could hear her exhale. I hate this, she said, without the controlled flatness she usually kept her harder feelings behind. Just direct, a little ragged at the edge. I've been running this company for 3.5 years. I've grown revenue by 60%. I've built a team that could run this without me if they had to. And there is a man who has never run anything, who has only ever given money to other people's visions, who is systematically trying to dismantle my reputation with innuendo. And the best move I have is to be calm and visible and not react. Yes, Ethan said. That's infuriating. It is, he agreed. I don't want to be calm and visible and not react. I know. I want to. She stopped. I know, he said again. She laughed, short and real, the kind of laugh that came out of exhaustion rather than humor. You're very good at knowing things without me finishing sentences. I pay attention, he said. Yes, she said quietly. You do. Sophie appeared at the kitchen doorway in her school clothes, backpack already on, which meant it was later than Ethan had registered. He held up one finger and she rolled her eyes and went to the refrigerator for her own morning routine. I have to get Sophie to school, he said into the phone. Go, Olivia said. I'm okay. I know you're okay, he said. That's not why I'm checking. A beat. Why are you checking? Because you shouldn't have to be okay alone, he said. That's the only reason. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it, that meant more than its duration. He let it be what it was. Ethan, she said, and his name in her voice sounded different than it had at Marble and Vine 4 months ago, when she'd shaken his hand and told him it was nice to meet him in a way she hadn't meant. I'll call you tonight, he said. Okay, she said. He hung up. Sophie was eating a banana at the counter, watching him with the peripheral attention she'd inherited from somewhere. He stood up and took his coffee to the sink. "Is she okay?" Sophie asked. "She's working through something," he said. Sophie peeled the last of the banana. "She'll figure it out," she said, with the confidence of someone who had made an assessment and filed it as settled. "She's the kind of person who figures things out." He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, standing at his kitchen counter in February light, already reading people with more accuracy than most adults he knew. "Yeah," he said, "she is." He rinsed his cup. Sophie put her banana peel in the compost without being asked, which she sometimes remembered and sometimes didn't, and this morning she did. Small mercies, small consistencies. The accumulation of small things into something that held. They left for school with 3 minutes to spare. The comms strategy worked, the way things worked when they were right, but not easy. Olivia's team spent 2 weeks building what they called a visibility campaign, which was a professional term for something simpler. They let the company speak for itself. A series of product announcements that had been scheduled for spring got moved up. A partnership with a mid-sized logistics firm that Bennett Tech had been finalizing got announced with enough detail to be substantive rather than promotional. Olivia gave one interview, not to a major outlet, but to a trade publication with a small and serious readership, in which she talked about the company's next 18 months with the specificity of someone who had already thought through every variable. No defensiveness, no acknowledgement of the noise, just the work, laid out plainly. The 2 items that Richard Hale had seeded into the media cycle got buried under actual information. Not defeated, buried, which was different. Defeating them would have required engaging with them. Burying them required simply producing something with more weight. Ethan heard about all of this in pieces, the way he heard most things about Olivia's professional life, through phone calls that started as check-ins and became something else as they went on, through texts that were brief and functional, and occasionally not brief or functional at all, through the Saturday mornings that had become a loose but consistent pattern, him and Sophie meeting Olivia somewhere in the city, the 3 of them building a shared geography of coffee shops and markets, and a particular park near the river that Sophie had decided she liked, because it had a path that went under a bridge, and felt, she said, like you were in a different city for a minute. What Ethan noticed, through February and into March, was that Olivia was beginning to stop managing him. It was a small shift, the kind you only caught if you were paying the right kind of attention. She'd been managing him since the beginning, in the way she managed everything, carefully, with a version of herself that was fully present but also slightly edited, slightly curated, the same way her office was functional without being entirely personal. She answered his questions honestly but briefly, offered things about herself in measured portions, kept a level of reserve that he understood was not coldness but protection. He'd never pushed against it. He'd just been consistent and consistent and consistent, which was the only thing he knew how to be. And then in March she started calling him when things were bad, before she'd figured out how to handle them. Not after. Before. The first time she called on a Tuesday night because a senior director had given notice. Not just any director, her head of product, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had been with the company since year 2 and who Olivia had trusted with a specificity she didn't extend to most people. Sarah had taken a competing offer, which was her right, and Olivia understood it as such, but the loss hit differently than the professional logic of it could explain. She wasn't just good at the job, Olivia said. Her voice was quieter than usual. Ethan was in his truck outside a hardware store, engine running for the heat. She understood what I was trying to build. Not just the technical side, the whole thing, the kind of culture, the way people should be treated, what success should look like from the inside. A pause. I don't have a lot of people like that. No, he said. People like that are rare. I know I can hire another head of product. I've been running through the candidates already. She said it without apology, the way she sometimes acknowledged her own instinct to handle grief by converting it immediately into logistics. But knowing that doesn't change the feeling of it right now. No, he said, it doesn't. She stopped. I'm not falling apart. I want to be clear about that. I know you're not. I just didn't want to sit with it alone tonight. He turned off the engine. Outside, the parking lot was gray and ordinary, a February kind of place even in March. Then don't, he said. She was quiet for a moment. You make it sound very simple. It is simple, he said. It's just not easy. They talked for 40 minutes about Sarah Chen and about the harder question underneath. What it meant to build something well and still have people leave. What the difference was between a company that needed you and a company you needed. Whether the loneliness at the top was structural or just something she'd accepted as structural because nobody had offered her a different version. She didn't arrive at any particular conclusion. That wasn't the point. The point was that she'd called before she'd processed it into something manageable, and he'd been there for the unmanaged version. And when they hung up, she said, "Thank you." And he said, "You don't have to thank me." And she said, "I know, I'm doing it anyway." And he didn't argue with that. March turned into April, and the relationship turned into something that didn't need a category anymore because both of them had quietly stopped performing uncertainty about it. They didn't announce it. There was no conversation where they formalized things. It was more that the language changed naturally. The way Olivia started saying "we" without correcting herself. The way Ethan stopped calculating how many times he'd mentioned her in a week. The way you only calculated things you were still being careful about. Sophie noticed before either of them said anything to her because Sophie noticed everything. She said, on a Saturday morning in April, while Ethan was making eggs and she was sitting at the counter doing something on her tablet, "You're different when she's coming over." He turned the eggs. "Different how?" "You pay more attention to things," she said. "Like you cleaned the coffee table yesterday." "You never clean the coffee table except before someone comes over." "The coffee table needed cleaning." "It always needs cleaning. You only do it sometimes." She set her tablet down. "I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I notice." He plated the eggs, put one plate in front of her, sat down across from her with his own. Sophie picked up her fork with the air of someone who was going to continue the conversation whether he engaged with it or not. "Do you like her?" Sophie asked. The way she asked it was without the arch quality the question could have carried. She wasn't trying to be knowing or theatrical. She was just asking, the way she asked most things, because she genuinely wanted to know and had decided she was old enough to ask directly. "Yeah," he said. "I do." Sophie ate a bite. "Does she know that?" "I think so." "Have you said it?" He looked at his daughter. "You're 9. "I know how old I am. Have you said it?" He ate his eggs. "Not in so many words." Sophie made the face. The one that said she was working with information he didn't have. "Dad, she reads the notebook when she thinks nobody's looking." He stopped eating. "What notebook?" "The one she brings sometimes, the one with the shapes." Sophie speared another bite. "When you're not paying attention, she takes it out and kind of holds it, like she carries it for a reason. That's not just a work thing." She looked at him steadily. "She thinks about things more than she says. You should probably say stuff first." He sat with that. "You're giving me relationship advice," he said. "You're in 4th grade." "I'm in 4th grade, and I'm right," she said, with a composure that was, now that he looked at it directly, not entirely unlike Olivia's. He wasn't sure whether that was alarming or reassuring. He decided it was both, at different levels. The board meeting happened in April. Olivia had been preparing for it since February, which meant Ethan had watched the preparation in all its non-linear reality. The late nights visible in the texture of her voice on calls, the Saturday mornings where she was present but also somewhere else, the way she sometimes went quiet mid-conversation and then came back with an apology that he waved off because he understood it. The board had called a formal review meeting, not hostile, not yet, or not officially, but the kind of meeting that Richard Hale's months of background work had made possible. A review of strategic direction, a discussion of leadership vision, language that was corporate and neutral and meant something specific underneath. She told him about it the night before, sitting in his kitchen while Sophie did homework upstairs and the ordinary machinery of a weeknight evening ran in the background. Dishes in the rack, the faint sound of a television in the house next door, the smell of the coffee they'd made and mostly not drunk. "If this goes wrong tomorrow," she said, "it doesn't mean the company fails. I want to be clear about that. Even in the worst case, the company is solid." "I know. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I'm walking in there tomorrow, having done everything I could do. Whatever happens, it's not because I wasn't prepared." He looked at her. She was in her work clothes still, the ones she wore on long days, and her hands were around her coffee cup, and she had the look she got when she was doing the things Sophie had identified, thinking more than she was saying. "You're scared," he said. She looked at him. "I don't get scared." "Everyone gets scared," he said. "You just do it quietly." She was quiet for a moment. If Hale gets what he wants, if the board decides to restructure oversight in a way that gives him operational influence, then everything I've built in the last 3.5 years starts to erode. Not immediately, not visibly, but I'd know. And I'd have to decide whether to stay inside that or walk away from it. And if you walk away, then I figure out what's next. She said it with a steadiness that he believed, but also could see the cost of. I've thought about it. I have options. I'm not without resources. A pause. But it would hurt. Yeah, he said. It would. I built that company, she said. Not from nothing. My father built the foundation. But everything it is now, the direction, the culture, the team, the product vision, that's mine. Losing it to someone who never built anything in his life would be... She stopped, set her coffee cup down. What? He said. Unbearable is too strong a word, she said. It would be livable. I would live through it. She looked at him. But I don't want to. Then don't, he said. You know what you've built. You know what you're walking in there with tomorrow. That's not nothing, Olivia. That's 3.5 years of work that exists whether or not one man acknowledges it. She looked at him steadily. You say things like that very naturally. I just say what I see. I know, she said. That's what I mean. He drove her home that night. She lived 20 minutes away, in a building that was everything you'd expect from the numbers and nothing like the person, and walked her to the lobby and stood there for a moment in the ordinary non-drama of two people at the end of an evening that had mattered. I'll text you when it's done, she said. I'll be on site, he said. I'll have my phone. She nodded. She started to turn toward the elevator. Then she turned back. She kissed him. Not dramatically. There was nothing dramatic about it, which was actually what made it land the way it did. Just direct and brief and deliberate. The way she did everything that she'd decided to do. She pulled back and looked at him with the expression that wasn't quite a smile, but lived near one. I've been thinking about doing that since November, she said. November, he said. The coffee shop? The sidewalk outside Marble and Vine, she said. When you looked at Marcus and said exactly what needed to be said, and then held a door open. She paused. Small things accumulate. Yeah, he said. They do. She went inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the April night, which was cold still, the city not fully committed to spring yet. Then he walked back to his truck and drove home, and did not try to be calm about it because there was no one watching, and he was 32 years old, and something real had happened, and he was allowed to just let it be real. But the board meeting lasted 4 hours. He was on the second floor of a commercial build-out, reviewing a framing issue with his lead carpenter, when the text came through at 2:17 in the afternoon. It's done. Hale's advisory role has been formally limited to financial metrics only. No operational access. The board documented it. A pause, then a second message. I'm okay. More than okay. Can I come over tonight? He read it twice. His lead carpenter, a 50-year-old man named Darnell, who had been working with Ethan for 7 years and had the professional courtesy to pretend not to read people's expressions, said, Good news? Yeah, Ethan said. You want to finish reviewing this framing, or... Let's finish the framing, Ethan said. He typed back, Come over. I'll cook. Sophie will interrogate you about deep-sea creatures. Then he put his phone in his pocket and looked at the framing issue, which was real and needed solving, and solved it. She arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of wine she'd apparently bought on the way, which he noted because she was not a person who normally remembered to bring things to other people's houses. It was a detail. He filed it. Sophie came downstairs when she heard the door and surveyed the situation with the composure of a person who had already done her analysis and reached her conclusions. She said hi to Olivia. Olivia said hi back. Sophie asked if Olivia wanted to see the documentary she'd been watching about bioluminescent organisms, and Olivia said yes, and they went to the couch together while Ethan finished cooking, which was pasta because he was good at pasta, and it was a Tuesday, and some things didn't need to be occasions. He stood at the stove and listened to Sophie explain bioluminescence to a woman who already understood bioluminescence but was listening with complete attention as if she were hearing it for the first time. He could hear the specific quality of Olivia's listening, the brief questions that showed she was tracking it, the moments of silence that weren't absence but presence, the two of them building a shared conversation from a subject Sophie loved. He added salt to the water. He thought about what Sophie had said in April about Olivia holding the notebook, about saying things first. He thought about November and the sidewalk and the accumulation of small things. Dinner was good, pasta, a salad that Sophie helped put together by tearing lettuce with a level of commitment that was disproportionate to the task, the wine that Olivia had brought. They sat at the kitchen table and the conversation moved the way conversations moved in that house. Between whatever Sophie was currently focused on and whatever the adults were catching up on, without a clean boundary between the two, which was something that had been true before Olivia started coming around and remained true with her there, which told him something. After Sophie went to bed, with a good night that included a hug for Olivia, brief and matter-of-fact, the kind of hug Sophie gave people she'd decided were staying, he and Olivia sat at the table with the last of the wine and the good, tired feeling of a day that had been hard and ended well. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him. All of it. The 4 hours, the dynamics in the room, the specific moment when the board chair had read out the motion to formalize Hale's limitations, and Hale had sat very still and very quiet in the way that people sat when they understood that a thing was finished. The way 2 board members who'd been ambiguous all winter had voted with her, which she attributed to the February visibility campaign, and also to a one-on-one conversation she'd had with each of them 3 weeks ago that she'd never mentioned to Ethan because she was still, sometimes, handling things privately before sharing them. "I should have told you about those conversations," she said. "You didn't have to." "No, but—" She stopped. "I'm still adjusting to telling someone things while they're happening instead of after." She looked at her wine glass. "My default is to manage first and report later. I know it's not always what you want." "It's not always what I want," he said, "but I'm not keeping score." "You should sometimes. I'm a work in progress." "So am I," he said. "So is everyone." He looked at her across the table. "Olivia." "Yeah." "Sophie told me in April that I should say things first," he said. "So I'm going to say something." She looked at him. She was very still, in the way she went still when something mattered. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I have been for a while. I didn't say it because I was giving you the space to figure out what you wanted at your own pace, and I don't regret that. But I don't want to keep not saying it just because the timing isn't perfect. The timing's never going to be perfect." She was quiet. A long moment. "November," he said to fill the space. "The coffee shop. When you asked me about Sophie and then actually listened. That was the night I knew." She looked at him with the expression she'd been giving him for months, the one he could now read clearly, that wasn't quite a smile but was something better than a smile, something more real. Her eyes were bright in a way she wasn't managing. "I love you too," she said. "I've known since January, since you stood in my office and held the notebook and didn't make it strange." She paused. "I didn't say it because I was scared of what would happen to my life if I said it and meant it." "What would happen to your life?" he asked. "It would change," she said. "It would become less mine and more—" She searched for the word. "More ours." "Is that bad?" She looked at him steadily. Outside, the April night had gone deep and quiet. Somewhere upstairs, Sophie was asleep. Her room, that specific silence of a sleeping child that parents learn to recognize. The kitchen was warm from the dinner, the table between them ordinary and solid. "No," Olivia said. "That's not bad." He reached across the table. She took his hand and held it, not performing anything, just holding it the way you held something you'd decided to keep. There were still things unresolved. Richard Hale wasn't finished. Formal limits didn't change the man, just the mechanism, and Ethan knew that as clearly as he knew anything about people who didn't accept outcomes. There was the ongoing work of building something between two people who had both spent years becoming self-sufficient in ways that didn't always make room for another person. There was Sophie, who was doing well but was still 9 years old and had a mother who lived 30 minutes away, and a life that was going to keep changing in ways none of them could fully predict. There was all of that. None of it was going away. But Olivia's hand was in his at the kitchen table, and the house was quiet, and the wine was almost gone. And some things didn't need to be resolved tonight. Some things just needed to be allowed to be what they were. Richard Hale didn't accept the board's decision quietly, because men like Richard Hale never accepted anything quietly. They accepted things loudly, through lawyers. The letter arrived at Bennett Tech's legal department on a Monday morning in May, 3 weeks after the board meeting, and Olivia called Ethan from her car on the way to the office because she'd read it on her phone in the parking garage and needed 60 seconds of something real before she walked into a building full of people who would be watching her face for information. "He's claiming the board acted improperly," she said, "that the vote was procedurally flawed. He wants it reversed, and he's threatening litigation if it isn't." Ethan was already at a job site. He stepped away from the noise of the crew and stood near a concrete wall that still smelled like fresh pour. "Is it procedurally flawed?" "No. Our general counsel reviewed everything before the meeting. The process was correct." Then it's a pressure move," he said, "not a real case." "It's not a real case," she agreed, "but a lawsuit, even a bad one, creates noise. It creates the narrative that there's instability. It could affect our summer funding round." She paused, and he could hear the parking garage echo around her, the distant sound of a car somewhere in the structure. "He knows that. That's the point." "What does your counsel say?" "That we respond formally, request evidence of the procedural flaw, which doesn't exist, and let the process play out. That it will likely not reach actual litigation because there's no case." She exhaled. "Which I believe. I do believe that. But between now and the resolution, there are 3 months of noise." "Is the funding round in those 3 months?" "End of July." He thought about it. "Who's in the round?" 2 existing investors and 1 new institutional. The existing 2 are solid. They've been with us through the Bennett transition, and they've seen the numbers. The new one... She stopped. "The new one is the one I'm worried about. They haven't made a decision yet. If Hale's action creates enough ambient uncertainty, they might take a wait-and-see position and push to Q4. Meaning the summer cash infusion doesn't come. Meaning it gets complicated," she said carefully. "Not catastrophic." She was precise about these things. "We'd manage, but it would require cutting the product timeline back significantly, and we'd lose momentum on the logistics partnership." He was quiet for a moment. The crew noise behind him had settled into a steady rhythm, the sound of a site that was moving well. He'd been building things long enough to know that the most dangerous problems weren't the ones that came at you directly, those you could brace for, plan against, absorb. The most dangerous problems were the ones that created structural uncertainty, that made people pause when you needed them to move. "The institutional investor," he said. "What do they need to see?" "Stability. Evidence that the leadership is not in dispute." A pause. "Evidence that the noise is exactly that, noise." "Then give them that," he said. "Not a statement, not a press release. Give them the actual picture. A meeting, direct, you and your core team. Show them the operational reality, not the narrative reality." "I've been thinking about that," she said. "Then do it. Don't wait for Hale's process to resolve. Get ahead of it." He paused. "He's betting on your instinct to manage this quietly and professionally and let the legal process work. That's the right instinct for the legal side. But the investor side is a different front. Treat them separately." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you see these things so clearly?" "Construction," he said. "When a project goes sideways, you have multiple systems failing at once: structural, logistical, budget, timeline. You learn pretty fast that fixing one at a time is how you lose. You have to triage and run parallel tracks." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I've been running a 400-person company for 3.5 years, and a construction foreman is teaching me crisis management." You already knew it, he said. You called me before you went inside because you needed to hear it out loud. That's not the same as not knowing. Another pause, shorter. I have to go in, she said. I know. Call me tonight. I will. And then, without any of the hesitation that had been there in November, December, January, all those months of careful calibration, I love you. I love you too, he said. Go run your